Okay, we're continuing our study of the life of Christ. And today, excuse me, today we are going to look at a story that's pretty short. And right now we're at a point that we've looked at the birth, the childhood, when he got baptized as a 30-year-old, and then his temptation following that. We looked at who his disciples were. Some were called very, very early in the ministry and joined with him very, very early. Some maybe over the next months or whatnot. And then we looked at what's called the beginning of miracles. I say called it, the Bible calls it that, this beginning of miracles, where he turned water to wine at the wedding of Cana of Galilee. And then what was his first trip to Jerusalem, where he met with Nicodemus. And at this trip, even early in his ministry, turned the tables of the money changers in the temple and all of that good stuff. So we're in the early stage of ministry, and I want to talk about the first time that he went back home to Nazareth after having begun his ministry. Now, the exact timing and sequence of some of these events is not possible to nail down through reading the Bible. So whether this Nazareth incident occurred before the first trip to Jerusalem or after is we're not sure, but we'll look at it for a moment anyway. And so Luke chapter 4 says, "And Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit into Galilee, and there went out a fame of him through all the region round about." So word is spreading like wildfire about this guy, the things that he's saying and the things that he's doing. So he's becoming famous throughout the region of Galilee. And it says he taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. So he's traveling around the Galilee region and teaching in synagogues. This photo is a ruins from Capernaum. And this is apparently the synagogue that existed at Capernaum during the time of the Roman Empire, which was the time of Jesus' life. So this is one of the locations where Jesus taught in their synagogues. Synagogues are interesting to me, and I just want to briefly mention, when you read the prescription of how the worship of God was to be done by the law of Moses and the ways of the people of God, the habits of the people of God given in the law of Moses, and in through the early centuries of the Israelites and the Jewish religion, synagogues are not mentioned. It's not really a thing. It's not a prescribed part of the law. But if we know the history a little bit, we know that the Israelite nation rose to significance and prominence under the judges in the book of Judges, and then under kings, starting with Saul and then David, possibly their greatest king, or maybe Solomon. You could make a case that he's the greatest king, and the kingdom was sort of at a peak under Solomon. But then there were still generations after that with the kingdom of Israel and the split kingdom, which we're not trying to get into every detail. But then they were conquered and taken into captivity. And it was first, in terms of the Israelites, the northern kingdom was first conquered by Assyria. And then the southern kingdom of Judah was first conquered by Babylon and taken into captivity, and then partially re-inhabited by foreigners, the region re-inhabited by foreigners. And many of the Jews, particularly prominent Jews, were taken away into Babylon, over to the east there off the map. But then Babylon was conquered by Persia. And so the Persian Empire ruled over Judea. And so that captivity lasted for 70 years. And then there was a return with the permission of the Persian emperor. There was a return to Judea and a reestablishing of a nation. And then over the course of about 400 years, there were no scriptures, but the people, the Jewish people, are occupying their own region, their own land, and politically, a lot of things happen during these times until ultimately, leading up to the time of Jesus, it all becomes part of the Roman Empire. And so the same way they were ruled by Persia, now they're ruled by Rome, except that Rome is running things in largely as a patchwork of somewhat independent nations. And so Judea is definitely under Roman rule, not independent, but they are their own country, their own nation at the time of Jesus. Now, during that transition time, those several centuries prior to Jesus' birth, these synagogues began to develop. And the Jewish people in their individual communities, in their individual cities and towns, started to establish a location where they would come together and study the word and teach and learn and be in fellowship with one another. But that's not something that really existed in Old Testament times. So it's kind of fascinating to me anyway. Well, that actually set the precedent for how the New Testament church operated in the book of Acts, gathering together on at least a weekly basis, sometimes a daily basis, and having a specific location where they would gather together. And they called that location the church in that city. They called that body of believers the church in that city, but they also called whatever building they met in the church. So the synagogues and the rise of the synagogues during the 400 years of silence was the precedent for the modern day church. And now we have churches all over the place, thank the Lord, and opportunities to gather together. People know where to go. If they want to find God, they know where to go. The synagogue was that institution in the time of Jesus. And so they would gather together at least on a weekly basis. Those and what we glean from individual stories in the Gospels and in the book of Acts is that they were kind of open to people. If it seemed like somebody had a ministry, they would have them share. They would have them speak. They would have them teach when they gathered together in the synagogue. Even Paul and them, as they traveled, they would be asked, oh, hey, if you've got something to share, get up and share it. And so that's going on with Jesus. His fame is spreading abroad. He's doing teaching and preaching out in the open air, and he's working miracles all over the place, and he's kicking tables over in the temple, but he's also coming into the synagogue and joining in unity, in a sense, somewhat, with the practitioners, the Jewish religious practitioners in the area. He's joining with them in their synagogues, and then they're allowing him to teach in the synagogues. And it says being glorified of all. So all over the place, he's getting approval, he's getting enthusiasm, he's getting support as he's teaching in the synagogues at this point in time. Now, these synagogues have leaders. And so the Jewish religion was somewhat intertwined with Jewish government, and because it's a religious nation, it's a religious government. And there was an avenue for rising in authority, in power, in notoriety, through going up the ranks in the religion and becoming a religious leader, with also therefore having some political power. And so in each one of these synagogues, in each one of these cities, there are people who consider themselves to be the head honchos in that area. We're the leaders, we're the teachers, we're the rabbis. And so you run into them in these synagogues, and we're going to see what happens with them in this story here. Aha, I do have some messed up thing. There we go. So it says he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. So this is an illustration, obviously not a photograph, but this is a pretty good representation, most likely, of what Nazareth would have looked like in Jesus's time. It's not a massive city, but it's not just a couple huts either. And this is where he grew up. And so he went to the synagogue there as well. And this seems to be his first visit back to Nazareth after having gotten his ministry off the ground and after his fame has started to spread abroad. So it leaves me kind of wondering, where is the mentality of the people there as he comes? What is their expectation? And what are they thinking good or bad about him with all the things they've been hearing and the fame that has spread abroad? But in any case, he's here in person now, and he stood up for to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. Now, in our Bibles, we have the book of Isaiah in one binding with all the other books of the Bible. At this time, they were in separate scrolls, and they brought him a scroll of Isaiah. He opened it, he looked through it, and he found the place where it was written in what we now call Isaiah chapter 61. In the King James version of Isaiah 61, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn." If you continue reading this chapter, you find it to be a prophecy of the Messiah. It was fascinating. Isaiah actually lived before the captivity even began. Once the captivity was experienced, the desire for a Messiah became very significant because the Jewish people, they viewed their nation in the context of this present world, more than they did in the context of eternity. And so in talking about being redeemed by a Messiah, they're thinking in terms of like in the book of Judges, where God would send someone to deliver out from under the oppression of some enemy nation. And in the captivity time in particular, and then also being under these empires over the years, they wanted their Messiah to come and restore Israel to a powerful, independent nation. Isaiah lived before there was even a captivity, but he prophesied about the captivity in some really specific ways. It's pretty fascinating. And he prophesied about the deliverance back from the captivity. He prophesied about the Messiah more than any of the other Old Testament prophets. And here, this is a prophecy of the Messiah. And we're living at a time where people are looking for the appearing of the Messiah to free them from the rule of the Roman Empire. But he didn't read the whole chapter. But as soon as you read any of it, these people studied the Bible from their childhood. And so they know the whole context. But here's what he read, and the way it's recorded in the book of Luke. It says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord." And he closed the book, and he gave it again to the minister and sat down. I thought that was pretty interesting. He just read, handed the book, sat down. And then he's looking at them and they're looking at him. It says the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. Now, let's just think about this. The voicing of the prophecy, the way Isaiah wrote Isaiah chapter 61, he wrote in the person of the Messiah. He's speaking in first person. He's not talking about the Isaiah himself when he says he's anointed me to do this and that and the other. He's not speaking of Isaiah himself. He's speaking in first person of the Messiah. And so Jesus just reads this in first person and then just sits down. And the eyes of them, all them that were in the synagogue, were fastened on him. They're like just looking at him like, what are you saying right now? And he's just leaving their minds to turn on what he is saying. Okay, so then it says, and he began to say unto them, this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. Isaiah prophesied about a guy who would come to do all of these things. And read Isaiah 61 later today. Read the whole chapter later today, because it's all implied. Jesus is implying all of it, even though he didn't read all of it. So Isaiah prophesied it. People have been reading it all of these centuries, looking for it to happen, looking for the Messiah to come. And Jesus says, today's the day. It has come. This has been read thousands and thousands of times by different people speaking in first person in place of the Messiah. This is the first time it was read out loud by the person properly speaking in first person, because it's actually me. This day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. And all bear him witness and wondered, which means they're like amazed and impressed and in awe at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And they said, is not this Joseph's son? Remember, this is his hometown. And it's not that big of a town. They know each other here. And like, isn't this Joseph's son? Don't we know this kid? And he said unto them, ye will surely say unto me this proverb, physician, heal thyself. Whatsoever we have heard done in Capernaum, do also here in thy country. So they've already heard about miracles that he's done. And so he's saying, you're going to want me to do miracles now, so that for me to prove to you that I am who I'm claiming to be. And he said, verily I say unto you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. So it's not surprising that you're looking for this proof. So what's going on here is that in Capernaum, you know, the Bible says, and of course, this is the passage I'm going to refer to is specifically in context of the New Testament church and what would be done after his resurrection. But the principle still applies, which is that these signs will follow them that believe. The signs will follow the belief. Another place, Jesus said, it's an evil and adulterous generation that seeks after a sign. So there's a problem when you get the cart before the horse. When you say, do a miracle and then I'll believe you. That's not going to work. The way it works with God is you believe me and then maybe I'll do a miracle. You still no guarantee what I'm going to do, but you got to believe me regardless. And then miracles only come following the belief and the faith and the acceptance. And he's saying, you guys are looking at me suspiciously, and you're going to want me to prove something to you. That's not going to work. However, I'm not surprised, because I've come back to my own country and no prophet is accepted in his own country. It's the way it's always been, and that's the way it is today. Not surprising. So then in verse 25, He says, but I tell you of a truth. You know, he could have, hold on a second. He could have taken a really soft approach and be like, hey, man, you guys know me, my family. And yeah, they were regular people, but they were good people. You never had any problem with my dad, my mom. They're wonderful people. Or he could have said, hey, I understand it's hard for you, to have seen me as a kid and then to hear me say this. I get that. That's tough, and it may take some time. He could have taken a soft, gentle approach with them, but here's what he does instead. I tell you of a truth, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elias, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, when great famine was throughout the land. This is a story from the Old Testament they're all very familiar with. But unto none of the widows in Israel was Elias sent. He was sent to Sarepta, a city of Sidon, way northwest of Israel, unto a woman that was a widow. So there was a widow woman up there that the prophet got sent to, not the ones in Israel. And you guys take a lot of pride in being the Jews and not the Gentiles, but don't forget this story. Elias was sent not to the Jewish widows, but unto a Gentile widow. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Eliseus the prophet, Elisha, and none of them was cleansed, saving Naaman the Syrian, not only a foreigner, but a captain of a foreign enemy army. And so he's saying, look, God does what he chooses to do to and for whom he chooses to do it. You don't have a claim on anything, just being the homies. And so you've got me here, and you want me to treat you special, but I'm just telling you, that's just not the way that it works. So verse 28, and all they in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath. You think Jesus was surprised by that? You think he like, oh man, I thought they would love to hear what I just said. No, he provoked them on purpose. Interesting, sometimes the way God works, it's always right, it's always wise, and it's always loving. But it doesn't always look like we think love looks like. And Jesus provoked these people to get angry at him, and for this issue, this problem that was in their minds and in their spirits to come to the surface. And at some point, they could have an opportunity for it to be dealt with, but probably not today. So what did they do? They rose up, thrust him out of the city, and led him unto the brow of the hill whereon their city was built, that they might cast him down headlong. So yeah, this is a hilly, mountainous area. This is a photograph taken in the modern day of a location that's called Mount, what is it called? Mount of Precipitation. And it's sometimes also called the Mount of the Leap. This is at Nazareth. And whether this is the exact ledge they went to or not, of course, who knows? But this is the kind of ledge that you do find at Nazareth if you go there now. So something along these lines that they took Jesus out to, yeah, that doesn't look good. Not friendly, not kind. So they led him under the brow of the hill whereon their city was built, that they might cast him down headlong. But he, passing through the midst of them, went his way. So this is a miracle here. We find him, after his resurrection, he walked through walls. I don't know if he was doing that kind of thing here to somehow. It's certainly miraculous one way or another. He went right through the midst of the crowd and just went on about his business, as they say, went his way. didn't let them cast him down headlong. And then he came down to Capernaum, down because Nazareth has elevation. Capernaum is closer to sea level. It's closer to the Sea of Galilee. So down, even though it's north. And he taught them on the Sabbath days. Because remember, he's already done miracles there, and they've already been glorifying him and believing in him. So he goes back there where ministry can be fruitful. So this visit to Nazareth was just just a little provocation, and just to make a mark and leave them to think on that visit, and for them to continue to hear about great and glorious things that happen in other places right in their own region of Galilee, and to ponder and to make a decision of whether to just be resentful and gripey of why didn't he do this, that, and the other, or to maybe come around to saying, man, if it's working over there and it's not working here, maybe the problem is here. Maybe I need to look at myself. Maybe I need to humble myself. And that's the message of Jesus. And sometimes humility, sometimes running into a brick wall can help us humble ourselves. It's up to us how we choose to respond. And sometimes a gentle touch can help, but not always. Sometimes a gentle touch allows a person to get through a thing without ever really confronting and surrendering the attitude that they have, attitude of entitlement, attitude of arrogance, attitude of pride, attitude of rebellion. We've got to bring these things into submission, and God will deal with us every kind of way. There are going to be some situations where he treats you with patience and treats you with kindness and gentleness. There are going to be other situations where he deals hardly with you, and where life deals things to you that you think shouldn't be. And if there was a God, this, but all of it is the love of God trying to get you to respond in the way that will bring you closer to him. And you have a choice on how to respond. These people in Capernaum were astonished at his doctrine, for his word was with power. What power? Back at the beginning of our reading, we read that he went there in the power of the Spirit. There's an intangible power of God that's at work. And however it chooses to work, we've got to choose to respond to it in a way that will bring us into the things of God. And that way is with humility.